Hello and welcome to the EMF Production Lab tutorial of the Arri light kit. So the EMF cage has both Arri and Ikan light kits, which are almost identical. They're both Fresnel light kits that have a 650, 300, and 150 light, as well as scrims, barn doors, dimmers, stingers, gels, diffusion, everything you need to get to lighting on set. So to give you a sense of what these lights are capable of, we're actually using the Arri light kit alongside some Kino flows to light this environment you're seeing here now. We have a 650 off to my left, that's our key light, that's into a little bit of diffusion. We have a 300, which is our fill light, also into diffusion. We want a high key setup, so the left and right side of my face are pretty balanced here now. Behind me, I have a Arri 150 tucked over a seamless. That's my backlight, so you see some of the hair light and some of the separation on my shoulders. And then we have Kino flows off to my left and right side that are doing the background, and that's creating the white void space of the seamless. They're also casting a little bit of edge down here on my left and right sides to also give some separation to the background. Now before we get into the function of the light, there's a couple tools that I want to go over that you're going to want to make sure that you have with you when you're on set. A pair of gloves and a multi-tool. These lights are going to get really, really hot after operating for even a couple minutes. So if you're ever going to be making adjustments to the light, pans, tilts, putting on gel or diffusion, needing to make adjustments to the barn door, you're going to want to have the gloves on. Second, you want a multi-tool or a pair of pliers for pulling the hot scrims out of the light if you ever need to make adjustments to the scrims. We'll get to that later on in the video, but I just want to emphasize it at the top to make sure that you have these with you when you're on set. So before we get to turning the lights off in the back, I just want to go over one more element here, which is the strain relief. So strain relief is keeping the weight of the cord from pulling on the back of the light, which can damage the internal components and create shorts. We don't want that. So to put strain relief on the light, you put a little bit of a loop in the cord, and then you use this blue rope here, which is for cable management, to hold the difference of the weight closer to the light and doesn't keep the strain on the back of the light itself. So now I'm going to pan the light into the back, and we're going to kill both of these lights. And we're going to go over the spot flood function, which is this dial here in the back. So the 150, 300, and 650 lights all have this same function. So right now, the light is considered flooded, which means we're seeing the broadest spread of the light possible. And then I can spot the light in by cranking it to the right or clockwise. And now we get a single conical beam, just a single spot that I can kind of target with the light. So in the flood function, again, it spreads the beam out and creates a nice even effect, versus in the spot function, it's just that single strong beam in the center. Now the reason we might want to do that is in the flood function, I can also control the spread of the light with the barn doors. So here, I can create a really deliberate slash effect on the backdrop, which you may find you may want for a certain scene where you want to highlight something in the background of a scene. Or if you just want to target someone's shoulders but not give them a hair light, you can use the barn doors to trap the light in. That's less obvious in the spot function. In the spot function, I'm trying to manipulate the barn doors, but I'm seeing less of that, that deliberate slash than if I'm in the flood function. So next we're going to talk about diffusions and gels that come in your kit. And you're going to want to have C47s or clothespins that will hold the diffusion or gel to the barn doors. So right now I'm going to slip this diffusion in front of the light and clip it to the barn doors, like so. And then just to keep the bottom from hanging down, I'm going to twist it a little bit and then clip it in place. And let's look at the effect of what we see that the diffusion is doing. So if I get rid of that top, if I spot the light in, you'll notice that by adding the diffusion, it spreads the beam out and simultaneously softens it. So you can see that the key and the fill light on me, I don't have many shadows on my face. There's a really nice even distribution of light. That's what the diffusion does. It spreads and softens the light. So it is taking a little bit of the value out of it. It's making it dimmer in effect, but it's also softening it, creating a more glamorous effect to reduce shadows. And it's really complementary on people's faces especially. So next we're going to talk about gel. I'm holding color temperature blue and color temperature orange. But let's not think of these as blue and orange, but think of them as daylight and tungsten. So this is a tungsten light, which has a slight bit of an orange glow to it, but we're currently white balanced in camera for tungsten, meaning that that orange light is going to appear as white in camera. Now if I add more tungsten to the front of the light, it's going to appear more orange. That's pushing it in the value of more tungsten, which is going to then create that effect in camera of looking more orange versus the white that we see if it's just perfectly balanced for tungsten. Now if I add the daylight, it's pushing it towards the spectrum of daylight, which is going to read as more blue in camera. So again, don't think of these as a blue gel or an orange gel for the sake of adding color to the scene, but think of them as a spectrum from tungsten to daylight. And that's where party gels come in. So party gels, unlike color temperature correction, are really, really, really dense colors just to give the effect of a color for the light. So you can see on this red gel how really strong that red is coming through. The one thing to keep in mind with color gels, though, is that because of how dense they are to get that color effect, it's also taking a lot of value out of the light. So this 300 watt light is reading more like probably a 150 watt light because of the amount of stops that we lose. So just keep that in mind if you're using really bright lights on these. These also are susceptible to smoking or melting the gel because of how dense the gel is. So anytime you use party gels, just make sure that somebody is standing by the light and making sure that the light doesn't start smoking or melting. So next I want to talk about scrims. In the back of your Arri kit or your Ikan kit is a scrim bag. And inside of here are what are called scrims. So scrims are a metal net mesh that you put in front of the light, in between the barn door and the light, to take some of the value out of the light without affecting the color temperature. So each of these kits comes with at least 2 scrims per light. A double scrim, which is the red scrim, and a single scrim, which is the green scrim. A double scrim will take out 1 full stop of light. A green scrim, or a single scrim, will take out a half stop of light. And if you look closely on the net mesh, you can see that the double scrim has twice the amount of mesh that the single scrim does. So now to add them to the light, you have to remove the barn door holder from in place. So you just lift up using your gloves and swing it to the side, because this is going to get super hot. You want to make sure you use your gloves for this step. Then you're just going to drop the scrim in between the barn door and the light itself. And you can see immediately that it takes out some of that value in the light. This is why we keep our pliers or our multi-tool on set, is because very quickly this scrim is going to get really hot. So you're going to want to use the pliers to pull it out if you ever need to remove them. And you can't just set these down on the floor or on carpet because of how hot they are. So no hardwood, no carpet. You can either set them down on something that's more heat tolerant, like an oven mitt or something like that, or just walk around with it in your pliers for a couple of minutes just to let it cool down before you set it down. So if I were to add both of these at the same time, you can see how much light is cut out of it without affecting the color temperature. That's the important part. The dimmer does have the same effect. So if I were to plug the dimmer in and dim it up or down, it will dim the light, but it is going to shift the color temperature, which we'll go over next. So now moving on to the dimmer. This dimmer is a 1K dimmer, meaning that it's rated for lights up to 1,000 watts. And to use it, you just plug the light into the dimmer, and then you plug the dimmer into your wall outlet. So we just went over scrims, and I mentioned that as you add scrims, it's going to take value out of the light, but it's not going to affect the color temperature. As I slow the light down, meaning that as I adjust the dimmer rating on the dimmer, it's actually going to warm the light up a little bit. And when I say warm it up, I mean the color temperature is going to push more towards tungsten and create a more orange effect out of the light. So just keep that in mind. A dimmer, although you have more control over the variation of the lighting effect, you will have a little bit more of an orange color shift in the light. Versus a scrim will not affect color temperature at all. Another cool attribute of a dimmer is that you can do rough effects with it. Let's say I add a little bit of CTO to the front of the light and then play with the dimmer. I can create something that approximates a slight bonfire gag, for instance. We've used our lights. We're done for the day. Your director is called wrap. Make sure you turn off your light before anything else, because you want this to fully cool down before you pack it away. If I were to just turn this off right now and try and pack it in to leave set, because we're trying to race to get home, the heat of this light risks melting the interior of your case, which you don't want. So first thing up, turn the lights off, start wrapping everything else, wrap cables, help fall in to get stuff to people's cars, and then let this cool completely before you pack it away. Moving on to the next part of our kit, this is a CStand. A CStand is a really common grip stand used for, you can hang lights from it, but more commonly you're going to be doing diffusion, silks, nets, or flags. So they automatically come with your Film 2 kits, your Film 3 kits, and your lighting course kits, but otherwise you have to specially request them from CISO or at the cage. So they're not often sent built. They're going to be deconstructed with the head and the arm sent as a separate part, and then the base and the riser sent from a separate part. So when you get the stand, it's going to be closed, and separated like this. So to put it on, you just do the exact opposite of what I just did. What I like to do is put it one end over my shoulder, slide the base on, and tighten the T-handle down, and then you open one leg at a time. And you kind of fan them out so that they're each individually seated in little slots. Now every single CStand is different. Some of them have a collar that you pull up on, and you can just sort of rotate the stand and the legs will fan out on their own. But yeah, these ones operate differently. You have to kind of crank them. So now we'll go over how to build that top. So these might be sent as separate items as well. You have two different items here. You have the arm and the head. So the head just pops right on top, and you tighten the T-handle down. And then you take the arm, and looking for the larger hole, you line it up, slide it down, and when you're using them on set, if you're just having them in staging, you kind of leave it right about an inch above your what's called the knuckle or the T-handle. And then you can just set them aside in staging until you're ready to bring them to set. So moving on to the road rag kit, which is standard in the lighting course kit, Film 2 kit, and Film 3 kit. I'm going to show you how to build one of the rags. So you open it up, and what you see here are two frames, a single net, double net, diffusion or silk, and a solid. So each of them serve a different purpose, and diffusion, like a silk, you would apply as opposed to the front of a light like we saw in the earlier section of the video. You can hold out in front of the light. And then the single and the double net operate the same way that the scrims do. So as opposed to putting them in the light themselves, you're holding them out in front of the light using grip hardware. So The first step is to build your frame. The frame would pretty much just pop into its own orientation. It has all these elastic strings to hold it in place. So you get it to about here. This is where you start. So now, on your flag, net, silk, they all operate the same. There's holes towards the back of them. So this is the back where the straps are going to go over the frame. So you slide one end of the frame into the hole of the rag, and then you flip it over, and then using either pressure against your body or against the floor, you take the other end and you literally just bend the frame. Don't worry about breaking it. This can take a lot of pressure. And you slide the other end of the net into that frame, and you push all the way back. And then last part, you just take these buttons and you slide them over the edge of the frame and clip them in place. So now you're ready to pop these into a CStand and use them on set. All right, so now you've got your CStand built and you've got your road rag built. It's time to use them on set. There's a couple other things I want to cover about specifically using the CStand before we actually rig it. So I like to have everything nice and neat on the CStand. I don't like to have all of these T-handles loose and spun in different directions. The normal orientation for when you're staging it and using it on set is like this. You have all of your T-handles nicely lined up on the left side and everything tightened down. And then your knuckles on the gobo head and the gobo arm are all facing to the right. That way, it's ready to be run into set and used really quickly. Once you get into set, you can start loosening them, but when you're sitting and staging, keep everything nice and neat. That way, when somebody comes to grab this, everything doesn't just fly off or send arms flying in any different direction when you're trying to move it. When you do move it, you're going to pick up the stand from both the outside arm and the riser. That way, everything is free of becoming a pinching hazard. If my hands are inside of the arm and I go to pass this off to somebody, all of a sudden I've pinched my fingers in here, which you want to be careful of. Lastly, when you rig from the stand, something super important to focus on is that everything needs to be rigged to the right. So not only to the right of the gobo arm and the gobo head, but right in terms of the orientation of the knuckle is spinning in a clockwise or righty-tighty motion. That way, it's only getting tighter as it's carrying the weight of the load. If I rigged it to the left or a counterclockwise motion, it's going to loosen as the weight bears it down, and it risks falling out of the stand. So we'll cover that again once we get to the actually rigging of the flag, but it's super important that it's always carried to the right. So as we discussed, I'm carrying the CStand into set. You always want to be cognizant of the amount of points that you're walking through set with. So especially if you're coming through a doorway, it might be a good idea to close these legs up and just always kind of carry it over your shoulder, or if you can, keep things kind of tight and close to your body so that you're not risking bumping into anybody. And especially if you're coming around corners or through a doorway, you always want to call out, hey, points are coming through the door, carrying equipment through the door, something along those lines, just to make sure that other people are aware of your presence. Because these are big, heavy pieces of equipment. And especially when you're at eye level, there's a lot of points that you can poke someone's eye out, poke a tooth out. Dangerous equipment. So we're arriving to set, and we're going to place the stand down with the big leg facing where you want the weight to go over. You then take a sandbag, if you carried it with you, it goes over the big leg. You want the sandbag to be holding over the big leg and not touching the ground. If it's touching the ground, it's not serving any purpose. It's not activating until the stand is about to get rocked. So by having it over the big leg, all of that weight is bearing down and concentrating on the center of gravity that needs it most. Then you're going to take your flag release your knuckle, and then this pin needs to line up with the hole that will accommodate it, which is the smaller of the two. And it just slides in. And as we discussed, you always want to rig over to the right. So right now, the weight is bearing out over the right side of the knuckle and carrying it down in a forward direction. If I were rigging like this, this is now counterclockwise, meaning that if I tighten this down and I just give a little bit of a knock on that, it's going to completely loosen and not serve its purpose. So you're always, always, always rigged in a clockwise motion to the right. Think righty-tighty. It's super critically important. This is one of the most dangerous pieces of equipment because you're rigging either a light or a flag over top of potentially an actor's head. If this gets knocked out and it falls out, you risk hurting somebody. So always, always, always to the right. And so finally, I just wanted to give you a demonstration of why you might want to use a flag on set. So you have a light, it's sending out all of its spill. So you can take a flag and your CStand and get it as close as possible to where you want to flag off that section. And as you can see, if I just put a little bit of a pan on that CStand, I can really create a really strong, defined line of separation using that flag. So there's a million reasons you would use different types of silks, nets, diffusions, but I just give you this as a simple demonstration not only of how to build and use the equipment, but how to rig it safely and effectively.